Are Geometry Dash levels art? With how complex and imaginative our levels have become, it seems likely that they're actual art. To find out if our levels are art, we'll have to examine the definition of art. So, what makes something art? Well, the answer is pretty complicated. The definition of art is heavily debated. Older definitions of art say that it's simply the effective application of knowledge. Art, in this traditional sense, is just a skill. Art doesn't necessarily have to produce an aesthetic result, like a painting or a sculpture. For example, with this understanding of art, martial arts becomes art. This art uses knowledge to fight bad guys, for example. This is very different from our modern understanding of art, which is the application of knowledge to produce an aesthetic result. With this definition, the skill has to produce something aesthetic, something that can be appreciated for its beauty or emotional power. Think of music and paintings. With this recent understanding of art, martial arts isn't an art. Using this definition, art has to be something aesthetic, something that can be appreciated for its beauty and emotional power. Sure, martial arts can invoke certain emotional feelings inside of us, but they're not the kind we're looking for in an art. If we go with this recent understanding of art, that would mean that the decoration in Geometry Dash levels is art. You're using your knowledge of the editor and traditional artistic concepts like color theory to create an aesthetic result. That would also mean that the music used in the level is art as well. The artists of the song use their knowledge of things like tempos and instruments to create well-sounding music. But I doubt you needed any convincing that music is an art form. It's already one of the most established forms of art. So the decoration and music in a Geometry Dash level are art, but what about the gameplay? Well, remembering the modern understanding of what makes something art, the activity has to produce an aesthetic result. While layouts can look aesthetically pleasing, especially with the help of some decoration, the main focus of the gameplay is to make an enjoyable playing experience, which obviously doesn't have much to do with aesthetics. So this means that the gameplay part of a Geometry Dash level isn't art. But remember, I'm coming to this conclusion by looking at the modern definition of art presented earlier. The debate of what makes something art is still currently going on. You can have different understandings of what makes something art, just like how it's acceptable to have different political opinions. It would technically be acceptable to use the older definition of art, which is again that art is simply the effective application of knowledge. The thing you do doesn't necessarily have to produce an aesthetic result. So if we go with this meaning of art, gameplay is art. In gameplay creation, you're applying your knowledge of gameplay mechanics to create an enjoyable experience for the player. If you stretch this definition enough, even playing the game becomes art. When you play the game, you're applying your knowledge of gameplay mechanics, not to create gameplay, but to actually play through it. You're also applying the knowledge you learned from practicing the level to go from 0 to 100. Now, the definition of art aside, seeing how Geometry Dash levels use multiple different forms of art, it would be strange to classify levels as a whole as its own art form, similar to how we classify things like sculptures or dances. I feel that Geometry Dash levels are just a combination of multiple different art forms, and not a form of art on its own. For an example of what I mean, video games are not exactly art. They simply combine many different forms of art, like music, storytelling, and digital art. So to properly answer the question brought up at the beginning of the video, no, Geometry Dash levels are not art. They are simply combinations of different art forms brought together to create the level. What parts of the level are actually art depends on who you ask, but the modern understanding of art says that the decoration and music in a level are art. Subscribe for more question and documentary style Geometry Dash videos like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you later.